Hello, in this section we're going to speak about terms and concepts which you might encounter with the analytics intelligence area. The first two that we'll talk about are parametric models and nonparametric models. Now, a parametric model is just a fancy name for statistical techniques like linear regression that are very common and well understood. A nonparametric technique is a fancy name for a machine learning technique that uses trial and error as the means of coming up with a solution. To explain the difference about these two, I'm going to bring up a Microsoft Paint to give as an example. So right now, this squiggly line here, these are supposed to represent mountains. So let's pretend that you have you want to use a parametric technique to get up on a mountain. And so the job is to come up with find the highest mountain in the world. Now, if you're going to use a parametric technique and you have these beach balls here, let's have these beach balls. What will happen with a parametric technique is that all of the beach balls, no matter where they start, will end up at the same place. So what will happen is hopefully they'll end up on the top of this mountain. That would be an optimal solution. This would be Mount Everest. But sometimes parametric models don't work so well. Like, for example, if you have multicollinearity in the data or you have outliers, there's all sorts of reasons that your model, a parametric approach, may not end up with the best technique, but idealistically you would want to be here. But a parametric technique like a statistical model, everybody should get the same answer. So you and your friend and your brother are all building a parametric model. They might all end up on the top of this mountain. So it doesn't matter where they begin, that's where they will end up, is all on the same mountain. And so when you run your parametric technique, this is where they will end up. Now the green balls are introduced, the green beach balls, and those will be starting points for a non-parametric technique. And with a non-parametric technique, they become sensitive to the starting position because it's a trial and error approach. And if I say go to the highest mountain on Earth and I give you an algorithm to say keep walking uphill, well, it would depend where you start. If you start in Alaska, you might end up on Mount McKinley, which is a great answer because it's a very high mountain. But if you end up in the Himalayas, you would end up on Mount Everest, which is the highest mountain. However, with a non-parametric or machine learning technique, you might also start in Death Valley, California, which is really flat, and you might end up on a gopher hole. So if we were to apply some non-parametric techniques, these would be the starting positions, and we might end up with the following solutions. So you can see this one ended up at the top of Mount Everest, the highest mountain. Over here we ended up on a relatively high mountain, and over here this was a bad solution. So with a parametric or statistical approach, you will not be sensitive to the starting position, and everyone will end up at the same place. Hopefully the optimal place, although possibly not, which is why a non-parametric technique should also be tried, which could sometimes give you a great solution, sometimes not as good a solution, sometimes a horrible solution. Non-parametric, sensitive to starting position. Now, as I mentioned before, another term is machine learning. Machine learning is a buzzword that is really popular right now as of 2016. It's a phrase that you hear a lot of. It's nothing new under the sun. It is simply another name for non-parametric models, and it involves things like neural networks and decision trees and random forest and all these other techniques that have been around for years and years. They just get a new fancy word and then everybody has to try it. So anyways, that's parametric, think statistics, non-parametric, think machine learning. So regression is parametric, neural networks, decision trees, random forest, that would be a non-parametric technique. Anything that involves trial and error. The next concepts we're going to speak about are a holdout sample data set and overfitting. these two complement one another because when you build a model, you don't want to see if your model's any good by testing it on the same data you built the model. If your model's any good, it ought to be able to perform well when it's now seeing data that it's never seen before. If it can't, if it's really, really good at your training data, but it's really bad at test data, then your model has been what's called overfit. Now, I'm going to give you an example because this is an important concept that all of analytics analytic models is really built around guarding against, because you want a model that you have confidence in. So I'm going to give you an example for this. So for this model here, or for this presentation, I want to just give you an example of overfitting and a holdout data set being used to test for overfitting. So I built a very simple scenario where you can differentiate between males and females, and that would be the best way to differentiate between some kind of quality. And I thought, well, what's the best line of demarcation between males and females? And of course, the obvious answer is the Three Stooges. Okay, men like the Three Stooges because they're funny, and women think that the Three Stooges are not funny. So let's pretend that we didn't know that ahead of time. So this is the Three Stooges, and if you're unfamiliar with them, they're one of the most underrated comedy team of the 1940s with their surrealistic use of violence to underscore social commentary of the day. So let's say that this is our training data set here. So we have me. I'm a male and I'm 50 and I like the Three Stooges. And my son Donald is a male and he's 15 and he likes the Three Stooges. And my son David likes them. My little brother surprisingly does not like the Three Stooges, but my nephew Andrew, who's 20 years old, likes the Three Stooges. My wife Catherine does not like them. My daughter Emily does not like them. Caitlin doesn't. My sister Carol likes the Three Stooges, and my other sister Vicky does not. So let's say we build a predictive model. Now we're going to build 3 of them here. The first one's going to be a naive model. We're going to assume everybody likes the Three Stooges, okay? So we're just going to assume everybody likes them. The second model is going to be an overfit model. And here's the model. I'm going to assume that if your name is Don, Donald, David, Andrew, or Carol, then you like the Three Stooges. If your name isn't Don, Donald, David, Andrew, Carol, you don't like them. So that's my model. Now, if I were to test my model on this, well, let's first of all go the third model, the model I said. If you're a male, you like the Three Stooges, and if you're a female, you don't. So if we did this, let's test our model on our training data set. So here we have all of our data, and if I have the naive model, everybody likes the Three Stooges, I'm going to be right here, 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 and here. 50% of the time, I'm right. Of course, I'm wrong in these cases, but that's the model. Now, here's my overfit model where I say if your name is Don, Donald, David, Andrew, or Carol, you like the Three Stooges. Otherwise, you don't. And I get 100% accuracy on that model. Now, we already can guess that this is not going to be a good model, but this is a perfect example of an overfit model. It's perfect on the training data. Now, here's the model I said. Guys like the Three Stooges and girls do not. So you take a look here, and we have me and my son and my other son, my little brother. I say he likes him, but it turns out he doesn't. My nephew Andrew, and then we have over here females, except for my sister Carol seems to like the Three Stooges. So on the training data set, I have 100% accuracy, and I only have 80% accuracy. But if you're testing on your training data set, you would think you've got the best model. However, now we introduce test data, data that the model has never seen before. What happens if we apply these same models to new data? So we have my friend Carl, my friend Dave, Paul, my sister's husband. They all like the Three Stooges. My nephew Johnny does not like them. My brother's wife, Trish, loves the Stooges. My mom and my wife's friends and my daughter, Emily, her friend Maddie, doesn't like the Stooges. So there you go. So if we apply the models to this, here we go, the naive model. Everybody likes the Three Stooges, and it's right 50% of the time. My overfit model over here, because nobody is named Don, Donald, David, Andrew, or Carol, my model is going to return a no for everybody, and it's going to be right 50%. This is the same as the naive model. This thing is as good as pulling names out of a hat. And then, of course, here's my model, the good model, that says that men like Three Stooges, women do not like the Three Stooges. And that's, again, 80%. So this is why we have the test data set, because you want to see if your model will perform. Your model should perform as well on the test data as the training data, and the test data should perform about the same. If there's a massive difference, that's called overfit. So if you can't perform well on data you've never seen before, then your model is no good. And just incidentally, people ask, my wife always wonders why I let my kids watch the Three Stooges, and the answer is because it's a very educational process. Only by watching the Three Stooges can you learn probably the single most valuable self-defense technique known to man. Of course, we're talking about the Mo Howard eye poke. And this is when he pokes Curly in the eye an awful lot. And here he's doing it again, and Curly's getting hurt. Now, if you want to know the defense to the Mo Howard eye poke, you hold your hand up like that, and he can't poke you in the eyes. So the Three Stooges is a highly educational program. Now, two more concepts that we need to talk about related to this subject is a champion-challenger and a model degradation. So what's champion-challenger is the whole idea behind predictive models is that you don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. If you have a model that's good, like for example our Three Stooges model, and we know that men like the Three Stooges more than women, that's a good model. It's not a perfect model, but it's a very good model. So you put that one into production and you can score new people and you'll do a pretty good job. That will be the champion model. But as you collect more data over time, you can begin to fine-tune that model. So, for example, you can say, well, that people from the United States and are male would like the Three Stooges, whereas if you come from another country like, I don't know, China, where they probably don't have the Three Stooges, you probably don't like them because you don't even know what they are. So the next concept is model degradation, and the reason why you also want to continuously challenge the model is because over time certain models will begin to go bad. The reason for this is that the environment that you build the model in will not always stay the same. For example, you could build a auto insurance model on who's going to crash their car, and if you did this in 1920 when there was like 13 cars on the road, that's a different environment than today in downtown New York City, Times Square, where it's packed with taxi cabs and it's bumper to bumper traffic. Clearly it's a different scenario, and the things that make you a risky driver are different. Let me give you an example, a practical example, is let's assume that you had a time machine and you were going to go back in time and build a predictive model on the life expectancy of a brontosaurus. So here we have a picture of a brontosaurus, and this is a big giant reptile, and it's lived back in, I don't know, the Jurassic period, I don't know any of those things, but he lived out in the jungle, and there was hot, and there was trees running around. And if you built this nutrition model that tried to predict his life expectancy, it would be a very good model because you had a lot of brontosauruses and you built this model with a lot of data, and you can accurately predict its life expectancy. However, if you got in a time machine and you put a brontosaurus in the back of your time machine and fast forwarded up to an ice age, Suddenly your brontosaurus is walking around in the snow, and they were not built to live in the snow. Furthermore, you got woolly mammoths out there and cavemen, and they don't like brontosauruses. So probably the woolly mammoths would eat the brontosaurus, and the cavemen would throw spears at it. And the brontosaurus is, and plus the cold weather is not helping matters, the brontosaurus is not going to live as long because he's living in the snow. Okay? So the point is, your really good predictive model that predicted life expectancy of a brontosaurus suddenly, because the external world has changed, is now a really bad model. This is why that's called model degradation. Something happened, something changed, and a good model has turned bad. No fault of yours, just the world has changed. You constantly have to be on guard for a model degrading in performance. And that's one of the functions of the analytics intelligence people, is to guard against a model degrading. They have to constantly validate that the model is still functioning. Finally, the last two terms that we're going to discuss is generalized linear models. You will hear that term a lot if you are a data intelligence or a BI person, and the analytics guys will drop that term, and you won't really know what it means. But it's not a difficult concept. You are familiar with linear regression most likely, because that's, again, something taught in high school and in many college courses. Generalized linear models are simply an extension of linear regression that you know, so that it can apply to other types of data. For example, if I have a yes or a no, is this person going to crash their car? That is, you cannot model that with linear regression. It is a yes or a no. But using generalized linear techniques, I can apply much of the same linear regression approaches and techniques for building a model. I can convert my yes-no answer into another form. I transform my yes and no into a different number. I put it in a log odds format, but that doesn't matter, and I don't mean to confuse you, but that's, I'm going to solve this yes-no problem. I might have what's called Poisson models. What's that? That's a counting number. Instead of it being continuous data like how much money is a person going to spend, 32 cents or $19 or whatever, Poissons are, I'm going to buy 0 bottles of wine, or 1 bottle, or 2 bottles. It's a counting number. There's other types of models or distributions and target variables out there, and using generalized linear models, I can solve those as well. That's really the only thing you need to know about that. It's just think, if you want to understand what a GLM is, just think, I can solve lots more regression problems on data that I used to not be able to apply linear regression to. The other thing you're going to hear a lot of is Tweedy distribution. What's Tweedy distribution? You hear it a lot in the insurance space, but it actually applies in many other fields as well. The concept is this. You'll have a big spike at 0. And that big spike at 0 is that most people in, let's say, in the insurance world, don't crash their cars. 90% of the people don't crash their car, or even higher. So you have a big spike at 0. However, if they do crash their car, there's a big damage, like let's say $5,000. And so there are techniques, if you try to apply simple regression to a Tweedy distribution, it's not easy and it's not all that accurate. So this is what a Tweedy distribution looks like. And you can see there's this great big giant graph here, or a spike at 0, because most of the people didn't crash their car. But you could see that when they did, the average amount of the damages was down here at around $5,000. So you see I've got a big spike at $5,000. Now the way they usually will model this is they'll first try to calculate the probability that somebody did crash, and then they'll build a second model to guess, okay, if he did crash this car, what did it cost me? And then you multiply those two together. So I would say this guy has a 10% chance of crashing his car, and if he did, it cost me $1,000. So 10% times $1,000 is $100. So that would be what the insurance company charges you. But this concept of a Tweedy distribution, although you hear it in insurance, you will hear it in other areas as well. Banking. Most people don't default on the loan, but when they do, this is what it costs me. Most people don't buy an automobile, but when they do, they spend $20,000. So that is the concept of Tweedy distribution.